And with permission, I would like to make a statement about the Mark Ellison review. In addition, I would like to update the House on work to improve standards of integrity in the police. In July 2012, I commissioned Mark Ellison QC to conduct a review examining allegations of corruption surrounding the initial, deeply flawed investigation of the murder of Stephen Lawrence. I also asked Mr. Ellison to examine whether the Metropolitan Police had evidence of corruption that it did not disclose to the Macpherson Inquiry. In June last year, Peter Francis, a former SDS undercover officer, made a number of allegations about his previous role, including an allegation that he was deployed to gather evidence with which to smear the family of Stephen Lawrence. In response, I expanded the terms of reference of Mark Ellison's review, encouraging him to go as far and wide as necessary to investigate the new claims. The House will also be aware of Operation Hearn, which was set up by the Metropolitan Police in October 2011 to investigate allegations of misconduct by undercover police officers in its former Special Demonstration Squad. Operation Hearn is led by Derbyshire Chief Constable Mick Creedon, and particular elements are overseen by the Independent Police Complaints Commission. Mick Creedon's investigation has worked closely with Mark Ellison and will publish its own report on the allegations made by Peter Francis later today. Mr. Speaker, I will now set out the key findings of the Ellison review. The full report has been published and is available in the House Library. The totality of what the report shows is deeply troubling, and I would like to also set out my response. I asked Mark Ellison to review and answer three key questions. First, was there evidence of corruption in the Metropolitan Police during the Lawrence investigation? Second, was that evidence withheld from the Macpherson Inquiry? And third, was there inappropriate undercover activity directed at the Lawrence family? On corruption, Ellison finds that specific allegations of corruption were made against one of the officers who had worked on the investigation of Stephen Lawrence's murder, Detective Sergeant John Davidson. The allegations were made by a police officer to his superiors, but were not brought to the attention of Macpherson. Ellison finds that this lack of disclosure was a significant failure by the Metropolitan Police. Ellison has looked at the Independent Police Complaints Commission's 2006 report into these allegations, as well as the Metropolitan Police's own review in 2012, and he finds both investigations were inadequate. Ellison also finds the MPS's record keeping on its own investigations into police corruption a cause of real concern. Key evidence was the subject of mass shredding in 2003, and a hard drive containing some of the relevant data was only discovered in November 2013, after more than a year of the MPS searching for it. As a result of this, Ellison has serious concerns that further relevant material which would show corruption has not been revealed because it cannot be found or has been destroyed. Mr. Speaker, the other question Mark Ellison set out to answer was whether there was inappropriate undercover activity directed at the Lawrence family. Ellison finds that SDS officers were deployed into activist groups that sought to influence the Lawrence family. On Peter Francis's allegation that he was tasked with smearing the Lawrence family, Ellison has found no surviving record that supports the claim. However, given the lack of written records from the era, and since such tasking would have been more likely to have been oral rather than in written form, Ellison says that he is unable to reject the claims Mr. Francis has made. Aside from the specific claims made by Mr. Francis, Ellison reports on a separate and wholly inappropriate use of an undercover officer during the Macpherson Inquiry. Ellison finds that an officer, referred to as N81, had been deployed into one of the groups seeking to influence the Lawrence family campaign while the Macpherson Inquiry was ongoing. Ellison refers to N81 as an MPS spy in the Lawrence family camp during the course of judicial proceedings in which the family was the primary party in opposition to the MPS. As part of his deployment, N81 reported back to the SDS personal information about the Lawrence family, as well as what is described as tactical intelligence around the inquiry. In August 1998, the SDS arranged for N81 to meet Richard Walton, then a detective inspector involved in writing the Met's submissions to the Macpherson inquiry. SDS files record that they had a fascinating and valuable exchange. Mr. Speaker, Ellison finds that the opening of this channel of communication was completely improper. He finds no discernible public benefit to the meeting taking place and says that had it been disclosed at the time of the inquiry, it would have been seen as the MPS trying to achieve some secret advantage in the inquiry from SDS undercover deployment. If it had been made public in 1998, Ellison finds serious public disorder of the very kind so feared by the MPS might well have followed. In addition to this, Ellison has reported on the SDS more widely. He comments on the extraordinary level of secrecy observed as to any disclosure that might risk exposing an undercover officer. This meant that the SDS operated as if exempt from the proper rules of disclosure in criminal cases. And this means there is a real potential for miscarriages of justice to have occurred. In particular, Ellison says there is an inevitable potential for SDS officers to have been viewed by those they infiltrated as encouraging and participating in criminal behaviour. He refers to officers in criminal trials failing to reveal their true identities, meaning that crucial information that should have been disclosed was not given to the defence and the court. And he finds that undercover officers sometimes failed to correct evidence given in court which they knew was wrong. Mr. Speaker, this means that there is a chance that people could have been convicted for offences when they should not have been. We must therefore establish if there have been miscarriages of justice. The Ellison Review has also investigated the way in which Dwayne Brooks was treated by the Metropolitan Police. The House will recall that Mr. Brooks was a close friend of Stephen Lawrence and was with him when he was murdered. Mark Ellison finds that the MPS's handling of a 1993 prosecution against Mr. Brooks was unsatisfactory, but he finds no evidence that this was a deliberate attempt to smear Mr. Brooks. Ellison also finds evidence of inappropriate reporting on Mr. Brooks from an SDS officer. This included intelligence on Mr. Brooks' relationship with the Lawrence family and on the way in which Mr. Brooks intended to approach various legal proceedings, including civil action against the Met. Ellison says that this line of reporting should have been terminated, but instead continued from 1999 to 2001. Finally, Mark Ellison finds that the covert recording of Mr. Brooks and his solicitor in a meeting with the MPS in May 2000, while not unlawful, was neither necessary or justified. Mr. Speaker, the findings that I have outlined today are profoundly shocking. They will be of grave concern to everyone in the House and beyond, and I would like now to set out what I believe needs to happen in response. The Ellison Review makes a number of findings in relation to the issue of corruption. Ellison finds that there remain some outstanding lines of inquiry which could be investigated, both in relation to alleged corruption by a specific officer and possibly other officers. This is of the utmost seriousness. I have asked the Director General of the National Crime Agency to consider quickly how best an investigation can be taken forward into this aspect of Mr. Ellison's findings and report back to me. Ellison also refers to possible links between an allegedly corrupt officer involved in the Stephen Lawrence case, D.S. Davidson, and the investigation into the murder of Daniel Morgan. Ellison finds that the Daniel Morgan panel may therefore uncover material relevant to the question of corruption, and so it is key that the Daniel Morgan panel continues its important work. Operation Hearn has previously found that the Home Office was instrumental in the establishment of the SDS in 1968, in the aftermath of violence at the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations in Grosvenor Square. And it has also previously found that the Home Office initially provided direct funding for the SDS. The Home Office was the police authority for the Metropolitan Police at the time, so the interests of transparency require that we all understand what role the department played. My permanent secretary has therefore commissioned a forensic external review in order to establish the full extent of the Home Office's knowledge of the SDS. Mr. Speaker, in identifying the possibility that SDS secrecy may have caused miscarriages of justice, Mark Ellison recommends a further review to identify the specific cases affected. I have accepted this recommendation, and Mark Ellison will lead this work, working with the CPS and reporting to my right honourable friend, the Attorney General. This will mean that proper consideration can be given to those cases and any implications that may arise. In doing this work, Mark Ellison and the CPS will be provided with whatever access they judge necessary to relevant documentary evidence. Operation Hearn is a criminal investigation, and it is only through a criminal investigation that criminal or misconduct charges can be brought. So it is vital that we allow Operation Hearn to bring its current criminal investigations to a proper conclusion, which Chief Constable Creedon informs me should take around 12 months. Mr. Speaker, there are people inside and outside our country who seek to commit serious crimes, who seek to harm our communities, our way of life and our nation, who wish to harm our children. So it is entirely right, and indeed governments have a responsibility, to ensure that the police and other agencies have effective powers to tackle those threats, and to ensure robust legal frameworks exist for the use of sometimes intrusive tactics. Undercover officers, sometimes working in difficult and dangerous conditions, have helped bring criminals to justice. They have stopped bad things happening to our country. But the Ellison review reveals very real and substantial failings. The picture which emerges from about the SDS from this report and from other material in the public domain is of significant failings of judgment, intrusive supervision and leadership over a sustained period. Let me say that Mark Ellison has played a commendable public duty in revealing these issues. His report lays bare issues of great seriousness, not only in relation to Peter Francis, but also in respect of the SDS more widely. When I asked Mark Ellison to consider the SDS within the scope of his review, I asked him to tell me in his report whether he felt that a public inquiry was needed in order to get to the full truth. Though he does not go as far as recommending a public inquiry, he is clear that in respect of the SDS in general, and the Peter Francis allegations in particular, a public inquiry might be better placed to make definitive findings. I don't say this lightly, but I think that the greatest possible scrutiny is now needed into what has taken place. And so, given the gravity of what has now been uncovered, I have decided that a public inquiry, led by a judge, is necessary to investigate undercover policing and the operation of the SDS. Only a public inquiry will be able to get to the full truth behind the matters of huge concern expressed and contained in Mark Ellison's report. The House will, I'm sure, understand that an inquiry cannot be set up immediately. It must wait for the conclusion of the criminal investigation and Ellison's further work to identify possible miscarriages of justice. It is right and proper that those legal processes are allowed to conclude first, and Ellison himself identifies his further review as a priority before any public inquiry could take place. And this further work will also inform the inquiry's precise terms of reference. As I've said, the matters I've announced today are deeply concerning. More broadly, it is imperative that public trust and confidence in the police is maintained. I do not believe corruption and misconduct to be endemic in the police, and it's clear that the majority of policemen and women conduct themselves honestly and with integrity. In February last year, I announced to the House specific measures to address corruption and misconduct, ensure greater transparency, provide clearer rules on conduct and improve standards of professional behaviour, and this work is on track. The College of Policing, which has a clear remit for enhancing police integrity, is delivering a package of measures which includes a new code of ethics. This code sets out clearly the high standards of behaviour expected from police officers. In addition, the Independent Police Complaints Commission is being expanded and emboldened so that in future it will have responsibility for dealing with all serious and sensitive cases involving the police. And I can tell the House that I am reflecting on whether further proposals are needed. Mr. Speaker, I also want to ensure that those who want to report corruption and misconduct are encouraged to do so. I therefore want to strengthen protections for whistleblowers in the police, and I will bring proposals to the House in due course. We must also ensure that police forces have all the capability they need to pursue corruption. And so I have today asked the Chief Inspector of Constabulary to look specifically at the anti-corruption capability of forces, including professional standards departments. Arrangements for undercover officer deployments are very different today from those in the early 1990s. Under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act introduced in 2000, all deployments must be authorised as both necessary and proportionate to the issue being investigated. And this government has introduced further safeguards. The Independent Office of Surveillance Commissioners is now notified of all deployments and must approve those deployments that last longer than 12 months. We have also increased the rank of the authorising officer. All deployments must be authorised by an Assistant Chief Constable. Those lasting longer than 12 months are authorised by a Chief Constable. But there also needs to be a change in culture. We need to continue the work we have already done to reform the police. Mr. Speaker, from this autumn, the police will for the first time have the opportunity to bring in talented and experienced leaders from other walks of life to senior ranks. The College of Policing will provide those individuals with world-class training. Those coming in will bring a fresh perspective and approach and will open up policing culture. I believe it is one of the most important reforms in shaping the police of the future. I have committed to fund a cadre of new direct entrant superintendents from this autumn until spring 2018. So I challenge all of those forces who have not yet signed to take up this opportunity to do so. It is vital that the public know that policing is not a closed shop. So we are changing the culture of the police through direct entry, the code of ethics, greater transparency and professionalisation. We are transforming the investigation of cases involving the police through reform of the IPCC. And there is more I would like to do. The current law on police corruption relies on the outdated common law offence of misconduct in public office. It is untenable to be relying on such a legal basis to deal with serious issues of corruption in modern policing. And so I will bring forward amendments to the Criminal Justice and Courts Bill to introduce a new offence of police corruption, supplementing the existing offence of misconduct in public office and focusing clearly on those who hold police powers. In policing, as in other areas, the problems of the past have a danger of infecting the present and can lay traps for the future. Policing stands damaged today. Trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police and policing more generally is vital. A public inquiry and the other work I have set out are part of the process of repairing the damage. Mr. Speaker, Stephen Lawrence was murdered over 20 years ago, and it is deplorable that his family have had to wait so many years for the truth to emerge. Indeed, it is still emerging. Understandably, many of us thought that the Macpherson inquiry had answered all the questions surrounding the investigation into Stephen's death. But the findings I have set out today are profoundly disturbing. For the sake of Doreen Lawrence, Neville Lawrence, their family, and the British public, we must act now to redress these wrongs, and I commend this statement to the House.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the statement the Home Secretary has made and also the work of Mark Ellison in drawing up this extremely important but also very serious and disturbing review. The findings of the Ellison review will be extremely troubling, and the Home Secretary's statement is very serious today. Nearly 21 years ago, a young man of 18 was killed by racist murderers. And Stephen Lawrence and his family were denied justice then, and it is clear they have been denied justice ever since. And the findings in the Ellison review are all the more serious because in the 21 years since, repeated attempts have been made to get to the truth and to deliver justice, but despite all of those attempts, we still have not yet done so. So we in this House should show our support today for the Lawrence family in their continued determination to get to both the truth and to justice. But we also know that no family should have to keep fighting in this way for so many decades. And let me touch on some of the key findings that the Home Secretary has set out today. Because she has said, the Ellison Review has said, there are reasonable grounds for suspecting that one of the officers involved in the Lawrence investigation acted corruptly, but this has never been fully investigated. This is extremely serious and a full investigation is needed of the outstanding lines of inquiry the Ellison Review has identified, and I welcome the Home Secretary's confirmation that this will now be looked at by the National Crime Agency, and also her confirmation that links with the Daniel Morgan inquiry will be pursued too. And I would ask her to ensure, as I'm sure she will, that the House and the Lawrence family are kept updated with the timetable and course of this investigation. Second, the Ellison Reviews found that the full information about corruption and internal corruption investigations were not given to the Macpherson inquiry, and also that the Macpherson inquiry may have come to different conclusions as a result. It finds also that, and I quote, "The MPS record keeping is a cause of real concern. Key evidence was the subject of mass shredding in 2003. So I would ask the Home Secretary to ensure that the NCA also looks at the issue about whether information was willfully withheld from the Macpherson inquiry or whether it was willfully destroyed, and also to look at the wider issue around record keeping within the Metropolitan Police. The Home Secretary will also be aware we have asked before for an updated Macpherson-style review of progress since the original inquiry, because clearly there were a lot of changes that were made as a result of the Macpherson inquiry initially. And does she not think this would now be timely and would be an opportunity to also look again at the conclusions of the review and whether they would have been different in the light of this further information? Thirdly, the review has found that undercover operations were carried out against those around the Lawrence family, and also that information from those operations was given to those involved within the Metropolitan Police in the legal case being brought by the Lawrence family. And it says, quote, and I quote, "The reality is that N81 was at the time an MPS spy in the Lawrence family camp during the course of judicial proceedings in which the family was the primary party in opposition to the MPS. It's also found that the SDS, as the Home Secretary referred to, were also inappropriately and unjustifiably reporting on Dwayne Brooks. These findings are so deeply disturbing. The Ellison Review describes these operations as completely improper and wholly inappropriate, but the whole House will be shocked, and we should condemn it in the strongest terms. The Home Secretary is also right. These revelations may also mean that there have been miscarriages of justice. And so I welcome her decision now to instigate a public inquiry into the activities of the SDS, and she will know that we have called for an inquiry into the issue around undercover policing, and it is right that we should do so. The Home Secretary is right to say intelligence, of course, is a vital part of policing, and the Ellison Review says so, but it needs to be done within a clear legal framework with proper safeguards in place, and it is clear that that did not happen in regards to these investigations and operations that took place by the SDS against the Lawrence family and those linked to the Lawrence family at the time. We do not know how wide these miscarriages may go, but we cannot have a branch of policing to have operated in this way against the very ethos of policing and justice that, in fact, they were charged with protecting, but also the vast majority of police officers across the country have signed up to as well. And I would ask her to discuss further, not just with the family, but with others on these benches as well, about what form that public inquiry should take, and we would welcome further discussions on that. I welcome her decision too to keep pursuing the truth, because the Macpherson Review was set up to get to the truth in the first place. It's important too that we should also keep pursuing justice, and I would ask her to ensure that in pursuing all of these lines of inquiry, consideration is also given to any lines which could lead to prosecutions of the further suspects in Stephen Lawrence's murder. Finally, can I say that I would also urge her to consider going further in the reforms that she talked about towards the end. There is, I think, a serious question that the IPCC was not able to get to the bottom of this in the way that the Ellison review has done when it did an inquiry in 2006. They, of course, are the independent body charged with these sorts of investigations. They should be able to get to the truth, and they weren't able to do so. That is bad for justice and for policing, not to have a credible body able to get to the truth the first time around. I agree with her too about the importance of force-level professional standards. She will know that forces have raised concerns that currently resources are being transferred from force-level professional standards and corruption investigations to the IPCC. Clearly both need to be able to do the important job of them. And can I also ask her to look further, going further around oversight of undercover policing? Clearly this will be looked at in the public inquiry, but I would also urge her in parallel to look at further safeguards around undercover policing. She will know we have suggested previously additional safeguards that could be put in place, including around pre-authorisation of longer-term operations, because the current oversight regime clearly hasn't been effective enough at preventing some of the problems that have arisen. And could I also ask her to look too at the implications for the Hillsborough inquiry? She will know that when we had the discussion 3 weeks ago, we also raised concerns about whether there was inappropriate surveillance or intercept against the Hillsborough families. It is hugely important that we get to the truth about that as well, and that the full truth comes out at the earliest possible opportunity. Mr. Speaker, 21 years later, no one should underestimate the gravity of the institutional failure 2 decades ago, but also the continued institutional failure to get to the truth and the seriousness of this. The Home Secretary has said that we need to get to the truth. She is right too that police officers do a vital job to help the public keep us safe every day. They need public trust and confidence, and we all need truth and justice. And so, as 3 weeks ago, the Home Secretary made that statement about the failure of the criminal justice system to get to the truth and justice for the families of Hillsborough victims decades ago, today we are doing so over the murder of Stephen Lawrence decades ago. And families should never have to wait for decades to get to the truth, and everyone must recognise that these tragedies will continue to cast a long shadow over the vital work that our criminal justice system needs to do and police need to do unless we get to the truth and get to justice. We owe it to the family, but we also owe it to confidence in the justice system.
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, and I entirely agree with the comments the Right Honourable Lady has made about the significance of this review. But of course, as she has said, it is not alone in identifying problems that have occurred in relation to the treatment of cases. The Daniel Morgan case and the Hillsborough inquiry, the results of the Hillsborough independent panel also showed failings that had taken place. And it is absolutely, I think, imperative, as she says, in order for us to ensure that there is trust and confidence in the police. That is vital for us all, that we do deal with these appropriately and we do get to the truth. And as she has said, and I have said, the results of the Mark Ellison review are indeed truly shocking. And I suspect it will take honourable members some time to look at the review, and obviously to examine all of the aspects that Mark Ellison has brought out. But the extent to which this shows a deep failure that occurred at the time of the incidents that he was and behaviours that he is talking about, I think is obvious just from the remarks that I have made today in the House. It is necessary for us, therefore, to follow this up on in a number of different routes. In relation to the timetable for the further investigations that I've referred to the Director General of the National Crime Agency, I will, of course, be happy to keep the House informed as to the result of that and how that is going to be taken forward. And I would expect the Director General to look at various of the issues that she's referred to in terms as part of looking at how that investigation should take place and what is necessary in order to ensure that if prosecutions are required, then those can be put in place. The form of the public inquiry, I think it will not be possible for us properly to discuss this until we have seen more of the next stage of Mark Ellison's work, which is looking at this wider issue and looking at the question of the miscarriages of justice. But of course, I will want to ensure that that the public inquiry does have the right terms of reference and is able to conduct the job that we want it to do, and that obviously the Lawrence family will be concerned in ensuring that it does. So at the appropriate time, I think it will be appropriate to have discussions about the form and the terms of reference of that public inquiry. And in relation to the question of the IPCC, as she says, and as I said, Mark Ellison does find that the two IPCC, in the IPCC found its results of its inquiries and its work that this was not adequate, that they did not find the corruption that actually does appear to have been or is alleged to have taken place. In relation to the IPCC, I have already, obviously, giving it more resources and giving it more powers and giving it more of a task. And she referred to the question of transferring resources from professional standards departments. That is a reflection of the fact that we are transferring work to the IPCC. I think one of the concerns people have always had is about the police investigating serious complaints against the police themselves. That's why we're transferring to the IPCC that responsibility and the resources to undertake that responsibility. On the safeguards on undercover policing, we have, of course, recently changed these to enhance those safeguards so that though longer-term deployments must be authorised by a chief constable, anything over 12 months, and that undercover deployments are authorised by an assistant chief constable. And, as I said, the Independent Surveillance Commissioner's Office have to be notified of all deployments. So there is a stronger oversight in framework in there already. She's rightly raised the issue of the concern of Hillsborough families, that they may have been subject to inappropriate surveillance. I understand a formal complaint has now been made to the IPCC on that matter, and the IPCC is now considering how best to investigate those concerns that have been raised. There is much still to be done. Change has taken place over the years, but sadly what we have seen today is that there is a need for us to continue the inquiries and investigations to ensure that for the sake of the family in particular, but actually for the sake of us all in terms of trusting the police, that we do get to the truth.
Sir Peter Bottomley. Can I pay public tribute to the Honourable Member for Elton and John Walker for going to see the Home Secretary for Blackburn, which led to the inquiry being set up, and also to those who organised the meeting between the family and Nelson Mandela, which gave a degree of profile and quiet dignity to properly reflect the way the family had reacted. And I pay tribute to the family and to those with them, including Ros Howes, Baroness Howes, who managed to avoid any kind of disturbance. And while saying that, can I add the names of John Philpott, the local Plumstead commander, who within 24 hours of the murderous attack on Stephen Lawrence and Dwayne Brooks organised a community meeting at the town hall and said publicly that people knew that Stephen Lawrence was a good person, not a bad person. Can I also say that when the further inquiries take place, that my right honourable friend asked that they consider using Clive Driscoll, the police officer who's helped to have one person convicted, as an advisor, if not a member, so that what the police have known over the years can be added in as well. And can I end by saying to my right honourable friend that both in this case and in one 6 years later in Brighton, where a constituent of mine, Michael and Jay Abertan, were attacked, that the first failing was that the police didn't arrest the people who were thought to be the suspects and hold them separately, or have proper surveillance and gather evidence that was available at the time. We're now sweeping up mistakes that were made later. I pay tribute to all the police who do their job properly and do find the evidence straight away so that justice can be pursued in court.
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for the comments that he's made, and he's absolutely right. We should never forget that there are police officers out there who do their job perfectly properly, with honesty and integrity, and are bringing criminals to justice as a result of their work. And we should also not forget, and he is right to pay tribute to those who have campaigned over many years alongside the family and in this House to ensure that justice, those who were responsible could be brought to justice and that we can get at the truth. And I'm sure when the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Blackburn, set up the Macpherson inquiry, and when the results of that inquiry were received, everybody assumed that that inquiry had been able to look at all the evidence and get to the truth. Sadly, as we now see, that was not the case, and certain matters that should have been referred to them were not. He refers to a particular officer and the need to ensure that in the further investigations, police experience is not lost and knowledge of the case is not lost, and that is the matter that has been drawn to my attention. It's a matter that I am giving proper consideration to.
Mr. Clive Efford.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I welcome the announcement from the Secretary of State that there is to be an inquiry into the goings-on within the SDS, but we shouldn't be sidetracked from the core issue that initiated the Ellison investigation and a review, which is that corruption was an influence over the investigation into the murder of Stephen Lawrence, and that the evidence and information was withheld from the Macpherson inquiry. And I would like the Secretary of State to confirm that that will be part of the public inquiry where people have to come and give evidence under oath. There was a programme on TV in October 2006, in July 2006, called The Boys Who Murdered Stephen Lawrence. And Deputy Commissioner John Yates went on that programme and said that Detective Sergeant John Davidson was a corrupt officer. I contacted the IPCC and the Metropolitan Police and asked to know in what way his activities affected that inquiry. And I, in a meeting with the Metropolitan Police, was told categorically that his corruption had nothing whatsoever to do with the investigation into the murder of Stephen Lawrence. We now know from the Ellison inquiry that the evidence on that was destroyed. So on what basis did the Metropolitan Police tell me that? I also asked the IPCC to investigate what other crimes that Detective Davidson had been involved in that may have been corrupted by his illegal activities, and I answered there, I got none. Now all of this information needs to be investigated thoroughly in a full public inquiry. So can the Secretary of State guarantee that the public inquiry will not just focus around the SDS, but will take in those wider issues, because nothing short of that will be satisfactory to the public or the family of Stephen Lawrence?
I recognise the role that the Honourable Gentleman has played in relation to this matter and the concern he has expressed over the years and the efforts that he has made, as he's just evidenced to us, to ensure that the truth will be found in relation to the murder of Stephen Lawrence. In relation to the public inquiry, as I indicated earlier, we will be looking at the terms of reference once it is clear that Mark Ellison has been able to do his work in relation to the question of the SDS in general and the miscarriages of justice. It is specifically in respect of the SDS and the Peter Francis allegations that Mark Ellison identifies that a public inquiry might be better placed to make definitive findings, and that is the background against which we will be looking at the terms of reference of the inquiry. And it is not in relation to some of the other aspects that he was investigating that he has highlighted the potential for a public inquiry to find further evidence and get to the truth behind certain allegations. So the inquiry, as I said, will be looking at undercover policing and the SDS in particular, but we will be setting the terms of reference in due course when Mark Ellison's had an opportunity to conduct the further review that he has that has been proposed in his report and that I've accepted as a recommendation.
Sir Alan Beath.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the thoroughness of the Ellison inquiry and my